Now, South Sudan has been in the news. Cal Bombay is here. Cal is really an expert when it comes to South Sudan. Cal, you got involved while you were here at Crossroads. Give us a little history. How did that come about?
Well, first of all, we became involved with Lady Cox, and that is in the human rights situations and violations, and the freeing of slaves that had been taken by raids in the south by the north and sold not just in the north but throughout the Arab world. And that slowly transitioned into the place because of the raids and the bombings and the depredations from the north on their own southern citizens at that time. It turned into a famine, partially manipulated, some of it due to drought. But by the time I got involved in the feeding program and building farms, there were well over 3 million people displaced within southern Sudan, and another, I don't know how many, a couple of million outside, all around the world.
Now, this was back in the 90s, right?
96 and 7.
96 and 7. Now, you were involved for some time in the freeing or the ransoming of slaves. Any idea how many you were involved with over those years?
About 1,700.
1,700. Now, is that slavery thing continuing, or is it over?
They're not taking slaves, except sometimes these tribes that are fighting right now that we just saw, the Nuer, the Merle, the Dinka, and the Anuak. These 4 tribes are raiding each other, taking wives and children and cattle particularly. Thousands of cattle are changing hands, and this is an internal fight between tribes. It has nothing to do much with the north and south. Actually, the border has not even been legally settled yet between the north and the south, and what is happening is slightly north of the proposed border between the north and the new country called the Republic of South Sudan.
Now, the Republic of South Sudan is a a viable country. I mean, it's how old now? Is it would it be a year and a half?
Well, July, yeah, year and a half.
About a year and a half. Mm-hmm. And yet the border's not really fixed.
No, they're having discussions. Actually, they had an arbitration by the African Union, and they settled it that this is where it was going to be, but the North, in their normal manner, refused to comply with what they had promised to do, and that is to accept whatever that arbitration said. And so the fuss goes on and the talking goes on, and the provocations continue from the north to the south. For instance, the north cut off all supplies of petrol or gasoline from the refineries in the north, which came back to the south and kept the south mobile. They cut it all off. And now, for instance, even with our farms, I had to have a 60,000 liter tank built and brought up from Uganda and buy it in bulk in Uganda or Kenya to keep our farm going, because we could not get any fuel, diesel or gas.
Which is an irony.
It is, because 85% of the oil comes out from under the south.
Yeah. I was surprised that the South actually emerged as an independent republic. I mean, I didn't think the North would ever allow that to happen. Was it because of international pressure, or was it because of other reasons that it actually did happen?
If you ask the general African on the street, the first cause is God helped us. Huh. They say God did it. And the international pressure certainly did help, and they're the ones that forced them to the peace talks that began 3 years before the 2005 peace agreement assignment. So, and I was invited to that, by the way. I don't know if you knew that, but no. I was invited and given diplomatic status. Whoa. And I was in on anything and everything I wanted to be.
I actually want to talk about this because you may be the only missionary in the history of Africa who's been invited by the host country to become a citizen. But before we get to that, let's put up a map of Sudan, just in case any of our viewers are just wondering what it looks like. Now, what we have there is the north and the south. That river that's going east to west there, is that a border?
That's not a river, that's the border.
Oh, that is the border?
Yeah.
And it's still in dispute, however?
It is in dispute in certain areas.
And it's so variegated, why? Because of tribal areas?
There are so many tribes in South Sudan and in North Sudan. Yeah. Tribal disruptions take place often. Right. And unfortunately, the North helps to arm them to try to continue the genocide they themselves began against Southern Sudan back in 1989.
The name that most people associate with Sudan is Darfur. Is Darfur in the north or the south?
That's part of the north on the west side of the north of Sudan.
Did you ever go into those areas?
I've never been into Darfur.
No. Now, Cal, you're a pretty unique character. About a year and a half ago, you were invited by the parliament of this new country, the Republic of, is it Republic of Sudan?
The Republic of South Sudan.
The Republic of South Sudan, okay. You were invited by the parliament to address the parliament. And I read your speech. You pulled no punches. I mean, as I'm reading your speech, I'm thinking, was there anybody left, by the time you finished?
They were there.
Because you addressed the issues of corruption from a moral perspective. Tell us a little bit about that speech, what it was like giving it, and what the fallout was.
First of all, I was invited by the Speaker of the House himself, James Waniiga, and he is a Christian. And he wanted me to speak specifically on the subject integrity versus corruption in government, because corruption had already begun, even during the transitional years before they got their actual independence. And when I gave the speech, the Deputy Speaker of the House was sitting beside me and said, "Say what you have to say." And so I did, and actually we recorded it, and it took about 40 minutes. I used the Bible as the moral basis totally, and I used it like a hammer.
Yes, you did.
Because I apologized for nothing that God wanted.
In fact, as I was reading it, I'm thinking to myself, this is like an Old Testament prophet here. You're standing up, speaking to the leaders of the nation, and you pulled no punches.
I didn't pull any punches.
I mean, you were like a hammer.
And I saw people cringing. Yeah. I saw people wiggling. And then at the end, I gave what I guess is as close as an altar call that has ever been taken in a government body. And I said, those of you who will fight corruption from this moment on, I want you to stand to your feet. There was some hesitation of some. They were the reluctant ones, and there were hypocrites among them, I'm sure. But they stood as a body, and they repeated after me a promise to God. And they take those things seriously. Yeah. And then when it was all over, they opened it for questions. And some of them, I had already answered in my speech. But they asked a few questions that I addressed quite bluntly again. And then the last man to ask a question stood up, and he was a lawyer I had met way up when we were freeing slaves 10 years, 12 years before. And he made very positive comments, no question, and then said, I'd like to propose that we offer citizenship to Reverend Dr. Bombay. And so I thought, oh, I got goosebumps,
Oh, yeah.
I thought, what's going on here? And then the whole body of the assembly stood to the feet and started clapping. And after what I had said to them, I was kind of afraid they might stone me because I was very blunt. Yeah. So it was quite an experience.
Now, have you got a passport yet?
They don't even have them for their own citizens yet. No. Well, they're still working on. I mean, they're a brand new country starting from scratch.
No kidding. It's a true frontier, isn't it?
It really is.
Now, you've brought us some pictures, Cal. I'd like you to walk us through these pictures and just kind of give us an overview of Cal Bombay and Sudan. Let's take a look.
This is a road we had to build ourselves. We've got our own bulldozers, and our roads to our fields were so bad that they were breaking up our machinery before we got them to the fields. They just shook them apart. So we had to build them all. This is now finished. This is taken back in August. But this is our milling factory, which will be turning out. It's the first industrial-sized mill in all of South Sudan.
Milling grain?
Milling grain of every kind and any kind. Mainly it'll be corn.
Right.
Here we're building, this is one end of our workshop. We're putting 2 containers on each end of it, and we'll put a water tower on top of that, and then build a workshop, a three-bay workshop between the 2 sets.
By the way, this heavy equipment, we saw that front-end loader, and now this Caterpillar that's clearing land. Do you have to purchase that equipment?
Yeah, I had to buy it all, every bit of it.
And where do you buy it? There or here and ship it over?
Well, during the recession, prices went down on a lot of things here in North America. I bought 2 DC-6H Caterpillars and had them shipped from California.
Wow.
And I got them at probably a third what I'd have to pay for them in.
And how do you deal with the maintenance issues there?
Well, God has been very good to me in the last few months. A man from Manitoba who is a very accomplished mechanic looks after 152 trucks on the ice roads. That's where he is right now, on the ice roads, delivering to oil rigs and so on that can't be accessed any other time of the year. But in when he's got time, he goes over, and he's both training and setting up some rules and regulations and overseeing the whole mechanical improvement.
And what's he do for parts? You have to send to South Africa for parts?
No, we can go. It's only 500 kilometers to
500 kilometers to the local parts
Kampala
store.
in Uganda.
Yeah.
In Uganda.
Wow.